10 years ago, my parents abandoned me on my 25th birthday because my sister faked a medical emergency over a chipped nail. I blew out my own candles in a cheap diner, walked out of their lives, and swore I would never let them make me feel invisible again. So when they begged me to attend their 40th anniversary dinner tonight under the guise of family healing, I knew they had an ulterior motive. They still thought I was the exact same vulnerable girl they discarded. What they did not know was that I had spent the last decade building an empire out of their rejection. Before I tell you how I tore down their carefully curated facade in front of Atlanta high society, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind toxic family members exactly who they are dealing with. I am Aaliyah, 35 years old, and tonight I am sitting at a massive mahogany table inside the Obsidian Room. It is currently the most exclusive luxury dining establishment in downtown Atlanta. The ambient lighting casts a warm glow over the crystal stemware and the pristine white tablecloths, but the atmosphere at our table is freezing cold. My parents, Denise and Calvin, sit at the head of the table, celebrating 4 decades of marriage. I have not spoken a single word to them in exactly 10 years. I only agreed to come tonight because my mother left a tearful voicemail claiming they wanted a final chance at family healing. I knew it was a performance, but I decided to give them the audience they so desperately craved. To my left sits my younger sister, Chloe. She is the perpetual golden child of the family, draped in an ostentatious display of designer labels that scream new money. She rests her hand possessively on the arm of her husband, Connor. Connor is a white venture capitalist who loves the sound of his own voice more than anything else in the room. He spends the entire evening dominating the conversation, loudly bragging to my parents about his supposed 8-figure portfolio and the massive corporate acquisitions his firm is orchestrating. Denise and Calvin hang on to his every word. They lean forward, nodding vigorously, their faces glowing with pride. They treat Connor like absolute royalty, fawning over his business jargon and laughing entirely too hard at his mediocre jokes. This is the image of success they always wanted to project. They have spent their entire lives desperately chasing the illusion of elite status, trying to secure their place in Atlanta high society. In their eyes, securing a wealthy white son-in-law like Connor was their ultimate social triumph. Meanwhile, I am treated exactly as I have always been treated, invisible. I sit quietly at the edge of the table, sipping my sparkling water, watching their performance. For 2 hours, not a single person asks me how I am doing. No one inquires about my life, my career, or the decade I spent away from them. To them, I am just a proper seat filler necessary to complete the picture of a reunited perfect family. They assume I am still the struggling dropout living in a tiny studio apartment, a narrative they carefully constructed to excuse their own terrible parenting. Growing up, nothing I did was ever good enough. If I brought home excellent grades, they wanted to know why I was not involved in more extracurricular activities. But if Chloe simply managed to show up to school on time, they threw a parade in her honor. I was the scapegoat, the designated disappointment who existed solely to make Chloe shine brighter by comparison. Connor swirls the expensive bourbon in his glass and leans back in his chair, looking around the restaurant with an air of arrogant ownership. He criticizes the decor, claiming he has seen better design in basic corporate lobbies. He complains about the waitstaff, suggesting they lack the refinement required for true luxury service. My parents eagerly agree with every critique, desperate to align themselves with his supposedly superior taste. I listen to his complaints without changing my expression. Connor has no idea that every single detail of this restaurant, from the imported Italian marble floors to the custom velvet seating, was personally approved by me. He has no idea that the waitstaff he is currently belittling are my highly trained employees, earning salaries that eclipse his entire administrative team. I remain perfectly silent, allowing him to dig his own grave with his arrogance. As the waiter clears our dessert plates, the dynamic shifts. The forced politeness of the evening begins to evaporate. My mother straightens her posture, smoothing her expensive silk dress, while my father clears his throat, exchanging a significant look with Connor. I recognize that look. It is the same look they exchanged 10 years ago, right before they abandoned me at that diner. They are preparing for a confrontation. They invited me here tonight to put me in my place to reestablish their dominance and remind me of my inferior status in the family hierarchy. They want to show off their golden child and her wealthy husband, forcing me to swallow my pride and submit to their authority. Connor flashes a predatory smirk. He snaps his fingers loudly in the air, a rude gesture that makes my blood boil. The waiter approaches immediately carrying a thick leather folio. The bill for the evening has arrived. The table ordered the most expensive items on the menu. Multiple bottles of premium vintage wine, imported caviar, dry-aged steaks, and custom desserts. The total comes to a staggering $15,000. Connor does not even reach for his wallet. Instead, he nods to Chloe. My sister snatches the leather folio from the waiter's hand. She does not even glance at the total. She knows exactly what it costs. She turns to me, her eyes gleaming with malice, and drops the heavy leather folio directly onto my empty plate. It lands with a loud thud that echoes in the quiet dining room. The entire table falls dead silent. The surrounding diners turn their heads, their conversations halting as they sense the escalating drama. Chloe leans across the table, making sure her voice carries to the neighboring booths. Since you live in some tiny studio and missed out on a decade of family success, consider this your tuition in high society, she announces loudly. Pay the bill, Aaliyah. It is the least you can do to make up for walking out on us 10 years ago just because you were jealous of me. Her words are designed to completely humiliate me in public. It is a calculated attack, mirroring the cruelty I have experienced before, where an outsider is forced to pay for a lavish lifestyle they never asked for, as a twisted form of punishment. I look at my parents. They are not shocked. They are not intervening. Denise actually chuckles, taking a slow sip of her wine as she waits for me to break down. Calvin leans back, crossing his arms, an expression of smug satisfaction on his face. They are enjoying this. They have set a trap, expecting me to either burst into tears, beg for their forgiveness, or admit that I am a financial failure who cannot afford the exorbitant cost of their lifestyle. They want to watch me squirm under the weight of a $15,000 check while Connor and Chloe mock my supposed poverty. They want me to feel exactly as small, worthless, and inadequate as they made me feel 10 years ago. The silence stretches out. The tension at the table is suffocating. Connor looks at me with pure disdain, waiting for me to pull out a credit card that will inevitably decline. Chloe smirks, victorious in her mind, waiting for my public humiliation to be complete. But I do not cry. I do not panic. I do not even reach for my purse. I simply stare at the leather folio on my plate, feeling a cold, profound sense of clarity wash over me. The time for hiding in the shadows is over. I slowly lift my gaze from the bill, look directly into Chloe's eyes, and raise two fingers into the air. The sharp snap of Connor's fingers cuts through the ambient jazz music floating from the grand piano in the corner of the dining room. It is a harsh, entitled sound, the kind of gesture that immediately sets my teeth on edge. The waiter, dressed in an immaculate charcoal uniform tailored specifically for the obsidian room, steps forward with the grace and silence of a ghost. He carries a heavy black leather folio containing the final reckoning for the night. Before he can even properly present it to the table, Chloe's hand shoots out. Her stacked diamond bracelets clink aggressively against each other as she snatches the folio right out of his grasp. She does not even bother to open it or glance at the total. She already knows exactly what it costs because she and Connor spent the last 2 hours treating the menu like a blank check drawn on an infinite bank account. They ordered the Louis XIII caviar service without hesitation. They requested 3 bottles of a $2,000 reserve Cabernet. They demanded the dry-aged Wagyu tomahawks, instructing the kitchen to add white truffle shavings to absolutely everything. It was a feast designed for royalty, or rather a feast meticulously designed to completely bankrupt a designated scapegoat. Chloe slides the heavy leather folio across the polished mahogany table with a flick of her wrist. It glides over the wood and stops dead right in the center of my empty porcelain plate. The sound it makes is a loud, dull thud that abruptly silences the light chatter at our table. The entire dynamic of the room seems to shift in an instant. Connor stops his endless bragging about venture capital acquisitions, crossing his arms over his chest and leaning back with a predatory smile. He wants to watch the show. He is eager to see the haughty, independent sister-in-law brought to her knees. I look down at the bill. $15,000. The number sits at the bottom of the itemized receipt printed in crisp black ink. $15,000 for a dinner I barely touched, sitting through an anniversary celebration for parents who threw me away like yesterday's garbage the moment I stopped fitting into their rigid mold of acceptability. Chloe shifts in her seat, sitting up taller. She makes sure her voice carries, intentionally modulating her tone so she has an audience. She wants the tables adjacent to ours filled with Atlanta's wealthy elite politicians and socialites to hear every single syllable. She leans forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping a relentless rhythm against the wood. Since you live in some tiny studio and missed out on a decade of family success, consider this your tuition in high society, she announces loudly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and genuine venom. Pay the bill, Aaliyah. It is the least you can do to make up for walking out on us 10 years ago just because you were jealous of me. The cruelty in her voice is thick, practiced, and deeply familiar. This is not a spontaneous outburst of sibling rivalry. This is a highly coordinated, premeditated attack. I look past Chloe's glittering facade and focus my attention on my parents. Denise, my mother, elegantly picks up her crystal wine glass by the stem. She takes a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive Cabernet, using the rim of the glass to hide the triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Calvin, my father, adjusts the pristine cuffs of his tailored suit. He looks at me with that exact same expression of profound, crushing disappointment he used to weaponize against me when I was a child. They are not shocked by Chloe's outrageous demand. They orchestrated it. They lured me here under the false pretense of family healing just to execute this public execution. They needed an audience for their masterpiece of humiliation. They are waiting for the break. They want the old Aaliyah. They expect the girl who used to crave their validation so desperately that she would have emptied her meager savings account just to buy a microscopic scrap of their affection. They expect my breath to hitch. They expect me to hyperventilate, to stammer, to let the tears spill over my eyelashes as I am forced to admit that I do not have $15,000 sitting in my checking account. They want me to publicly confess my financial failure so they can swoop in at the last second, pay the bill with a heavy sigh, and cement their absolute dominance over my life. They want me to owe them a debt I can never repay. They want me shoved violently back into my designated box as the family failure, the cautionary tale they can use to make themselves feel vastly superior. I can feel the eyes of the other patrons burning into the side of my face. The restaurant has grown uncomfortably quiet as the surrounding diners sense the immense hostility radiating from our table. People pretend to look down at their phones or stare intently at their menus, but everyone is watching the drama unfold. The silence stretches out, thick, heavy, and suffocating. Connor lets out a low, mocking chuckle, shaking his head slowly, as if observing a pathetic, cornered animal. He glances at my father, sharing a silent moment of masculine solidarity, united in their disdain for the woman who dared to sit at their table without submitting to their authority. I look back down at the leather folio resting on my plate. $15,000. The sheer absurdity of the moment washes over me. 10 years ago, this exact scenario would have destroyed me. 10 years ago, I would have run out of the front doors of this restaurant, blinded by tears, convinced that I was inherently flawed and entirely unlovable. But I am no longer that frightened 25-year-old girl crying alone over a grocery store birthday cake. I do not cry. I do not tremble. I do not reach for my designer handbag sitting on the chair beside me. The panic they are so eagerly waiting for never arrives. Instead, a profound glacial calm washes over my entire body, starting from my chest and radiating outward to my fingertips. I realize right then with absolute certainty that the people sitting across from me are not my family. They are simply strangers who share my bloodline, strangers who derive sick joy from my pain. They are parasites feeding on the illusion of their own grandeur. I slowly lean back against the plush velvet upholstery of my custom dining chair. I keep my hands resting loosely and comfortably on my lap, refusing to show even a micro-expression of distress. I do not defend myself against Chloe's ridiculous projected claim about my supposed jealousy. I do not bother explaining that I walked out 10 years ago to save my own sanity and protect my spirit not out of envy for her shallow existence. I simply breathe in the cool, conditioned air of the dining room. I look past my mother's smirking face. I look past my father's arrogant, rigid posture. I look past Connor's smug grin and Chloe's desperate, clawing need for attention. I look directly across the expansive dining room toward the arched mahogany entryway. The general manager, Marcus, is standing exactly where he always stands during the peak dinner rush. He is watching our table closely, his professional instincts having already sensed the aggressive shift in the atmosphere. His posture is rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, fully prepared to intervene at the slightest sign of trouble. I lock eyes with him across the sea of glittering crystal and flickering candlelight. He holds my gaze, his expression entirely neutral, but deeply attentive. I do not say a single word to the people sitting at my table. I do not cry. I do not reach for my purse. I lean back, make eye contact with the general manager standing by the door and raise two fingers. A cheap 25th birthday dinner. I repeat her words slowly and let them settle into the suffocating silence of the private dining room. I do not raise my voice because I do not need to. The sudden icy calm in my tone forces my mother to stop breathing and my father to grip the edge of the mahogany table. Let us talk about that night, Chloe. Let us talk about why I spent my milestone birthday sitting completely alone in a fluorescent-lit diner, staring at a slice of stale pound cake, while asking a pitying waitress to light a single candle for me. I lean forward and lock eyes with my sister as her smug expression begins to falter. You called Mom and Dad exactly 30 minutes before my dinner was supposed to start. You were screaming into the phone claiming you were having a massive life-threatening panic attack. And what was the trigger for this severe medical emergency? You chipped your acrylic nail 3 hours before a date with some junior executive. You demanded our parents rush to your apartment immediately to console you, and they abandoned me without a second thought. My mother slams her wine glass down so hard the dark red liquid splashes onto the pristine white tablecloth. "How dare you!" she hisses with her voice trembling with that familiar, weaponized indignation she always used to keep me in line. "Your sister has clinical anxiety, Aaliyah. She was having a genuine mental health crisis, and you are making it about a dinner reservation. You have always lacked basic empathy. You have always been utterly selfish. You need to apologize to her right now for bringing this up and disrespecting her trauma." My father chimes in right on cue, nodding vigorously to support his wife and defend his golden child. "Your mother is exactly right, Aaliyah. We invited you here tonight to heal this family, but clearly you are still the exact same bitter, ungrateful girl who walked out on us. We provided a roof over your head, and this is the respect you show us. You should be apologizing on your knees for the scene you are causing." Before I can even formulate a response to their breathtaking delusion, Connor decides it is time to intervene. He firmly places his hands flat on the table, leaning his upper body forward to physically dominate the space between us. He puffs out his chest, wearing his corporate arrogance like a suit of armor. "Listen to your parents," Aaliyah, Connor says with his voice dripping with condescension and unearned authority. "It is cute that you own a restaurant. It really is. A great little hospitality hustle for someone who dropped out of college. But do not think pouring overpriced champagne and managing a kitchen staff gives you the right to talk down to my wife or disrespect this family. I deal in real money. My venture capital firm moves millions of dollars before you even turn on your ovens for the breakfast rush. I manage aggressive portfolios. I swim with the sharks in Atlanta high society. I am practically untouchable. I could buy this entire restaurant group out of my petty cash fund if I wanted to. You are still just a cook serving plates to people like me. My father smiles, looking at Connor with an expression of pure reverence. He nods eagerly, aligning himself completely with his wealthy white son-in-law over his own flesh and blood. Connor is absolutely right, my father says while puffing out his own chest. You need to learn your place, Aaliyah. You need to show some respect to the people who actually run the economy in this city. I let the silence stretch. I let Connor bask in his own perceived glory. I let my parents wallow in their misplaced pride. I do not show an ounce of anger. I do not defend my business or my wealth. Instead, I offer them a slow, terrifying smile. I reach down to the chair beside me, calmly unzip my designer handbag, and pull out a sleek, matte black folder. I place it on the smooth mahogany surface and slide it directly across the table. It glides perfectly, stopping inches from Connor's chest. Open it, I command softly. Connor tries to ignore the folder, crossing his arms and scoffing, but his fragile ego forces his eyes downward. He reaches out, flips open the black cover, and stares at the top page. I do not wait for him to read it. I narrate the truth out loud for the entire table to hear. Those are forensic financial audits, Connor. Your venture capital firm has not moved millions of dollars in over 8 months. In fact, you are functionally bankrupt. You are bleeding capital at an unprecedented rate just to sustain Chloe's shopping habits and maintain this ridiculous facade of wealth. Worse than that, you are currently under investigation by federal authorities for commingling and embezzling your clients' funds to cover your personal debts. You lease cars you cannot afford, and you pretend to belong to country clubs that have already quietly revoked your membership for non-payment. Connor's face instantly drains of all color. The arrogant sneer melts off his features, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. His hands begin to tremble slightly as he grips the edges of the audit report. The white privilege and corporate bravado he relied on just moments ago completely vanish in the face of hard, undeniable numbers. But he is a salesman at heart, and a cornered salesman always tries to bluff. He lets out a hollow, nervous laugh, hastily loosening his silk tie, as if the room has suddenly grown too hot. "You are bluffing," he stammers, with his eyes darting frantically between the documents and my face. "You hacked into some outdated system. You have no idea what you are talking about. My firm is entirely solid. We are untouchable. In fact, I do not need to listen to this garbage because I have a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with an anonymous holding company. They have already reviewed my pitch. They are wiring a $10 million buyout to completely recapitalize my firm by the end of the week. I am saving this family, not destroying it. You are just trying to tear me down because you will never reach my level." He slams the folder shut, looking at my parents for validation. Denise and Calvin immediately exhale collective sighs of relief, choosing to blindly believe his frantic lies over my concrete evidence. But Connor has just handed me the absolute perfect weapon. He has unknowingly stepped right onto the trap door, and I am more than ready to pull the lever. A cheap 25th birthday dinner. I repeat her words slowly and let them settle into the suffocating silence of our private dining room. I do not raise my voice because I do not need to. The sudden icy calm in my tone forces my mother to stop breathing and my father to grip the edge of the polished mahogany table. "Let us talk about that night, Chloe. Let us talk about exactly why I spent my milestone birthday sitting completely alone in a fluorescent-lit diner, staring at a slice of stale pound cake while asking a pitying waitress to light a single candle for me." I lean forward and lock eyes with my sister, watching her smug expression begin to falter under the weight of my direct gaze. "You called Mom and Dad exactly 30 minutes before my dinner reservation was supposed to start. I was standing out in the freezing rain waiting for them to arrive. You were screaming into the phone, claiming you were having a massive, life-threatening panic attack. And what was the actual trigger for this severe medical emergency? You chipped your acrylic nail 3 hours before a date with some junior executive. You demanded our parents rush to your apartment immediately to console you, and they abandoned me without a second thought. My mother slams her wine glass down so hard, the dark red liquid splashes onto the pristine white tablecloth, staining the expensive fabric. How dare you! She hisses, her voice trembling with that familiar weaponized indignation she always used to keep me in line when I was younger. Your sister has clinical anxiety, Aaliyah. She was having a genuine mental health crisis, and you are making it about a selfish dinner reservation. You have always lacked basic empathy. You have always been utterly self-centered. You were the strong one who never needed us, so we went where we were needed. You need to apologize to her right now for bringing this up and disrespecting her trauma. Disrespecting her trauma. I echo the phrase, letting a sharp, humorless laugh escape my lips. You left your oldest daughter sitting alone on her 25th birthday so you could drive across Atlanta in a thunderstorm to hold a grown woman's hand while she cried over a broken French tip. Do not lecture me about empathy, Denise. You conditioned her to weaponize her tears the second the spotlight shifted away from her. You fed into her delusions because it made you feel important. You treated my independence like it was an insult to your parenting, and you treated her weaponized incompetence like it was a virtue. You used the excuse that I was a strong black woman who could handle herself just so you could justify abandoning me. You did not miss my birthday because of a medical emergency. You missed my birthday because it was mine, and in this family my milestones were always treated as inconveniences. My father chimes in right on cue, nodding vigorously to support his wife and defend his golden child. His face flushes with anger as he points a thick finger in my direction. Your mother is exactly right, Aaliyah. We invited you here tonight to heal this family, but clearly you are still the exact same bitter, ungrateful girl who walked out on us 10 years ago. We provided a roof over your head, we fed you, and this is the respect you show us. You always thought you were better than this family. You always had this nasty attitude, thinking you did not need anybody. Well, look at you now. You act so high and mighty because you run a restaurant, but you are still just as miserable as the day you left. You should be apologizing on your knees to your sister and your mother for the scene you are causing in this establishment. I refuse to break eye contact with him. Apologize to a woman who just tried to force me to pay a $15,000 bill out of pure spite. I ask, my voice dropping an octave. Apologize to parents who spent my entire childhood making sure I knew my place as the designated scapegoat. I think you have entirely fundamentally misunderstood the power dynamic in this room, Calvin. I did not walk out 10 years ago because I was jealous of Chloe. I walked out because I finally realized that staying in this family meant shrinking myself to fit into a box you designed for my failure. I walked out because sitting alone in that diner blowing out my own candle taught me that I was the only person who was ever going to show up for me. And looking at you all tonight, desperately clinging to the same old toxic scripts, I am so incredibly grateful that I left when I did. You are exactly the same people you were a decade ago, just older and vastly more pathetic. My mother gasps, clutching her pearl necklace as if physically wounded by the truth of my words. She looks around the room desperately, hoping that the other wealthy patrons are validating her victimhood. Aaliyah, you are a monster, she cries, forcing artificial tears to well up in her eyes. I do not know how I raised a daughter with such a cold, dead heart. We are your blood. We are your family. If you do not apologize to us right this second, your father and I will stand up and walk out those doors. We will cut you out of our lives forever. I lean back in my custom velvet chair and gesture toward the grand arched entryway of my restaurant. The doors are right there, Denise, I say coolly. You are more than welcome to walk through them. But before you do, I highly recommend you check the weather outside because unlike 10 years ago, you will not be finding a warm place to hide. Chloe's lower lip begins to tremble genuinely this time. The realization that her usual tactics are failing completely, that I am no longer the helpless sister she can easily bully, is finally starting to penetrate her thick skull. She looks at her husband, seeking the validation and protection she has always relied on from white men in power. Connor, do something, she whines, tugging on the sleeve of his tailored suit. Tell her she cannot speak to us this way. Connor's face hardens. Throughout this entire exchange, he has been sitting in simmering silence, watching a black woman confidently dismantle the people who constantly stroke his ego. He views my defiance not just as an insult to his wife, but as a direct challenge to his own authority in the room. He shifts his weight, uncrossing his arms and glaring at me with a look of absolute disgust. He clearly believes that because I am a woman running a hospitality business, I am inherently beneath him. He thinks my success is cute but ultimately trivial compared to his corporate prestige. He thinks it is time to put me in my place. He raises his arm and violently slams his open palm flat down against the polished mahogany table. The loud, harsh crack of flesh hitting wood echoes sharply over the ambient jazz music, causing several nearby diners to physically flinch and look over in alarm. The silverware rattles against the crystal glasses. He leans his upper body forward across the table, using his large frame to physically dominate the space between us, wearing his corporate arrogance like a heavy suit of armor. "Listen to me very carefully, sweetie," Connor says, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register, dripping with condescension and unearned authority. "It is cute that you own a restaurant. It really is. It is a great little hospitality hustle for someone who dropped out of college. But do not sit there and think that pouring overpriced champagne and managing a kitchen staff gives you the right to talk down to my wife or disrespect this family. You are completely out of your depth here. I deal in real money. My venture capital firm moves millions of dollars in single transactions before you even turn on your ovens for the breakfast rush. I manage aggressive portfolios. I sit on executive boards. I swim with the sharks in Atlanta high society. I am practically untouchable in this city. I could buy this entire restaurant group out of my petty cash fund if I wanted to. So you need to fix your attitude right now, because outside of these four walls, you are still just a cook serving plates to people like me. The words settle over the table like toxic ash, suffocating the space between us. I wait for my father to say something. I wait for the man who raised me to draw a line in the sand to tell this arrogant outsider that he cannot speak to his daughter like she is dirt on his shoe. I wait for a shred of parental instinct to kick in and defend my dignity. But Calvin does not defend me. He does not even hesitate. Instead, he nods. He actually nods in complete agreement with Connor. He crosses his arms over his chest, straightens the lapels of his expensive suit, and looks at me with a sickening expression of validation toward his son-in-law. It is a profound fundamental betrayal that strikes at the very core of my identity. Growing up, Calvin used to lecture me constantly about the necessity of excellence preaching, that we had to work twice as hard to get half as far in this world. He demanded flawless grades and absolute perfection, always citing the harsh realities of society. Yet here he sits, actively aligning himself with a wealthy, entitled white man over his own black daughter. He would rather see me publicly humiliated, verbally reduced to a servant in my own establishment, than admit that his chosen golden child married a fraud. He has completely surrendered his role as a father, trading his self-respect for the proximity to Connor's supposed power and elite status. My mother, Denise, fully supports this silent betrayal. She mirrors her husband's gesture, taking another delicate sip of her wine, while her eyes gleam with undisguised pleasure. She looks at me with a cold, triumphant smirk, clearly thrilled that someone is finally putting the rebellious daughter back in her place. They are a united front of toxicity, entirely complicit in my degradation, absolutely giddy at the prospect of my failure. Seeing my parents fall into line behind him, Connor becomes completely emboldened. He mistakes my serene silence for submission. He assumes that because I am not yelling, screaming, or crying, I have been thoroughly defeated. He thinks he has won the battle, and so he decides to twist the knife further. He wants to ensure I am completely crushed financially and emotionally before he even finishes his dessert. You have absolutely no concept of how the real world operates, Aaliyah. He continues, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register that drips with unearned authority. You live in a fantasy world where feeding people and matching napkins to tablecloths makes you feel important. You think because you wear a nice dress and sit in a fancy room that you have somehow arrived. But I operate in the stratosphere. My venture capital firm is not just successful, we are an apex predator in the financial ecosystem. We dictate the market while you are busy dictating the appetizer menu. He takes a large, arrogant sip of his bourbon, leaning back slightly to survey the dining room before refocusing his predatory gaze on me. He uses his large frame to physically dominate the space, a classic intimidation tactic designed to make women feel small. Ideal in real money, he sneers, enunciating every single syllable to ensure his superiority is clearly understood. My firm moves millions of dollars in single aggressive transactions before you even turn on your ovens for the breakfast rush. I do not just manage money. I control entire portfolios. I sit on executive boards that decide the fate of thousands of employees. I swim with the absolute sharks of Atlanta high society, and let me tell you, you are not even a minnow. He continues his tirade, his voice growing noticeably louder. He clearly wants the neighboring tables to hear his resume, desperate for the surrounding elite patrons to recognize his supposed brilliance. In less than 48 hours, my firm is closing a massive merger, he boasts, his chest puffing out with pride. It is a 9-figure deal that will completely reshape the tech sector in the Southeast. We are bringing in unprecedented capital from overseas, holding companies, securing synergistic leverage that will make my firm virtually untouchable. When the ink dries on this merger, politicians will be begging for my endorsement. Mayors will be asking for my permission to pass zoning laws. I will own the very ground you walk on, and there is absolutely nothing a glorified caterer can do to stop me. He lets out a harsh, grating laugh that scrapes against my ears like rusted metal. You thought you could intimidate my wife with a little restaurant bill? He scoffs, shaking his head as if dealing with a stubborn, slow-witted toddler. You thought dropping a leather folder on the table would make us sweat. I could buy your entire hospitality group out of my petty cash fund without even checking my bank balance. I could purchase the Obsidian Room tomorrow morning, fire every single one of your employees just for fun, and turn this luxury dining room into a private parking garage just to secure a tax write-off. That is the fundamental difference between us, Aaliyah. You serve the elite. I am the elite. You are nothing but a temporary minor obstacle in our perfect lives. Beside him, Chloe is practically vibrating with absolute glee. Her eyes are wide with excitement, feeding off her husband's relentless bullying. She places her hand possessively over his, shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated venom. She feels entirely vindicated, secure in her delusion that she won the ultimate prize in life, while I ended up exactly where they all predicted I would be, at the absolute bottom. I let him speak. I do not interrupt his grand theatrical performance. I simply sit perfectly still in my custom velvet chair, absorbing every single word, every arrogant claim, every inflated lie. It is endlessly fascinating to watch a man enthusiastically dig his own grave and then beg for an audience to watch him jump inside. I do not defend my business acumen, nor do I attempt to validate my worth. I simply let the silence stretch out, allowing his words to hang in the air where they cannot be taken back. I look very closely at his face, past the aggressive posturing and the expensive tailoring. Beneath the relentless bluster, beneath the barrage of corporate buzzwords and the aggressive masculine posturing, I can see the microscopic cracks in his facade. I notice the slight, almost imperceptible bead of sweat forming at his hairline, despite the heavily air-conditioned temperature of the restaurant. I see the way his hand twitches slightly when he sets his heavy crystal bourbon glass back down on the table. He is overcompensating. He is desperate to project an image of infinite, untouchable wealth because he knows his reality is rapidly crumbling. He is an illusion wrapped in designer clothing, and he is absolutely terrified that someone might pull the thread that unravels his entire life. For 10 years, I have waited for a moment exactly like this. I spent a decade building an empire from the ground up, fighting tooth and nail against a world that constantly underestimated me. I turned every ounce of rejection, every cruel comment, and every lonely night into fuel. I built a fortress of wealth and power while they spent their time pretending to be royalty on maxed-out credit lines. They walked into my kingdom tonight thinking they were the rulers of the universe, entirely oblivious to the fact that I own the castle, the throne, and the very ground beneath their feet. I wait until Connor completely runs out of breath, his chest heaving slightly from the exertion of his own arrogance. I wait until the silence returns to our table, heavy, suffocating, and incredibly expectant. Chloe is smirking, her confidence fully restored by her husband's tirade. My parents are looking at me with immense smug satisfaction, waiting for me to finally break, to cry, to apologize, to run away, just like I did 10 years ago. They want me to surrender. But the tears never come, the panic they crave never arrives. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It is a light, effortless sound that instantly shatters their sense of victory. The sound of my amusement completely catches them off guard, causing Connor's confident sneer to waver for a fraction of a second. I maintain unbroken dead-level eye contact with Connor as I slowly reach down to the chair beside me. I grasp the zipper of my designer handbag. The metal teeth glide open with a smooth, sharp sound that slices through the tension. I reach inside and my fingers close around the smooth, cool surface of exactly what I came here to deliver. I pull out a sleek, heavy black folder and place it gently onto the center of the table. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It is not the tight, polite smile I have worn all evening to mask my contempt. It is a wide, bright expression of absolute victory. I lean forward, folding my hands neatly on top of the polished mahogany table. An anonymous holding company, I repeat, letting the words roll off my tongue, slowly savoring the taste of them. Scheduled for tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock. A $10 million recapitalization buyout to save your sinking ship. Connor smirks, entirely misreading my calm demeanor as surrender. That is right, he sneers, adjusting his posture to look even larger. So you can take your little folder of fake numbers and shove it. I am closing the biggest deal of my career tomorrow, and you will still be exactly what you are. Nothing. Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings, I say quietly. The smirk freezes on Connor's face. It does not fade gradually. It shatters instantly. The arrogant flush of color drains from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His jaw goes slack, and the confident, aggressive posture he was holding just a second ago collapses as if someone has physically removed his spine. I do not stop. I press the advantage, driving the reality of his situation straight through his corporate armor. You sent the final pitch deck to a man named Arthur Sterling. I continue, keeping my voice perfectly level and conversational. You practically begged him in the email thread last Tuesday. You used the phrase temporary liquidity issue 4 distinct times in 3 short paragraphs. You were so desperate for the cash infusion that you offered to surrender 70% of your voting rights, essentially handing over total control of your own firm just to stay out of federal prison. Connor's mouth opens but no sound comes out. He looks like a fish suffocating on dry land. His eyes dart frantically around the table, but he finds no sanctuary. Arthur Sterling is my primary wealth manager. I state, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the dining room like a newly sharpened blade. Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings is a subsidiary acquisition firm completely owned by my primary corporation. I am the anonymous buyer, Connor. I am the one holding the $10 million lifeline you are so desperately waiting for tomorrow morning. And as of this exact second, I am officially withdrawing the offer. There will be no buyout. There will be no recapitalization. You are going to face the federal auditors completely alone, and you are going to lose absolutely everything. The silence that descends upon our table is absolute. It is a heavy, ringing silence, the kind that follows a massive detonation. Denise and Calvin stare at me with wide, horrified eyes. Their brains are desperately struggling to process the impossible information they have just been given. The daughter they spent their entire lives treating as a worthless disappointment is the anonymous billionaire holding the fate of their precious son-in-law in her hands. Chloe is the first to break the silence. Her voice is shrill, vibrating with a rising, uncontrollable panic. What is she talking about, Connor? She demands, grabbing his arm and shaking it. Tell her she is lying. Tell her your firm is fine. We just leased the new Porsche yesterday. We put down a deposit on the summer house in the Hamptons. Tell her she's making this up. Connor cannot look at her. He cannot look at anyone. He stares blankly at the dark liquid in his bourbon glass, his hands trembling violently. The silence is his confession. Chloe whips her head around to face me, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure desperation and rage. "If you have the money, then you have to give it to us," she screams, completely abandoning her refined high society persona. "You are my sister. You owe us. You cannot just sit there and let my husband go bankrupt. We are family. You have to sign those papers tomorrow morning. Mom, tell her she has to sign the papers." It is a stunning display of delusion. After spending the entire evening degrading me, mocking my career, and attempting to force me to pay a $15,000 dinner bill out of pure spite, she instantly demands a $10 million bailout the moment she realizes I have the capital. She truly believes that her status as the golden child entitles her to my hard-earned wealth. My father, ever the patriarch, attempts to reassert his control over a situation that has completely slipped through his fingers. He straightens his tie and clears his throat, putting on his most authoritative voice. "Aaliyah, this has gone far enough," Calvin says, trying to sound commanding, but failing to hide the slight tremor of fear in his tone. "Family is family. Whatever grievances you have, you do not let your sister's husband face federal charges. You will authorize that holding company to transfer the funds tomorrow morning. We will supervise the restructuring of Connor's firm together. That is my final word." I look at the man who was supposed to protect me, the man who abandoned me in a diner 10 years ago because his favorite daughter chipped a fingernail. "You do not have final words in my life anymore, Calvin," I say, dropping the title of father entirely. "You lost that privilege a decade ago. I do not owe this family a single dime, and I certainly do not owe a $10 million bailout to a fraudulent, arrogant man who just spent the last 20 minutes belittling my existence. You bet on the wrong horse. You hitched your wagon to a white-collar criminal because you cared more about proximity to white wealth than you cared about your own black daughter. You get to live with the consequences of that choice." Connor suddenly slams his fist on the table again, but this time there is no authority behind it, only the frantic, cornered panic of a ruined man. "You are a liar," he spits, his voice cracking. "You are a glorified cook. You do not have $10 million. You do not own Vanguard Pinnacle. You are just trying to humiliate me. You are nothing but a restaurant manager." I look at him with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. I do not argue with him. I do not pull out bank statements to prove my net worth. I simply raise my right hand into the air and extend 2 fingers. Across the dining room, Marcus, the general manager of the Obsidian Room, immediately catches the signal. He moves with swift, purposeful strides, navigating through the crowded tables until he arrives directly at my side. He completely ignores Connor, who is currently red-faced and hyperventilating. He ignores my parents, who are staring up at him in shock. Marcus stops, smooths his lapels, and bows his head respectfully toward me. "Is everything to your liking tonight, boss?" Marcus asks, his voice carrying clearly over the table. "Do we need to have security escort anyone out of the building?" The word boss hits the table like a physical blow. Chloe's jaw drops open. Denise clutches her chest, looking like she is about to faint. Connor stares at Marcus, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "Everything is perfectly fine, Marcus," I reply smoothly. "However, there has been a slight misunderstanding regarding the billing for this table. Please take that $15,000 folio on my plate and tear it in half." Marcus does not hesitate. He reaches down, picks up the heavy leather folio, extracts the itemized receipt, and calmly rips it straight down the middle. I turn my attention back to Connor, who is now sweating profusely. I reach into my purse one more time and pull out a cheap, bright pink plastic calculator I bought at a pharmacy down the street, specifically for this occasion. I toss it onto the table. It bounces and lands right in front of Connor. "You are paying retail tonight, Connor," I announce, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "The Obsidian Room belongs to me. It is the crown jewel of my hospitality group, which owns 6 other elite venues across this state. The marble floors, you insulted the waitstaff, you belittled the wine, you guzzled down like water, it all belongs to my corporation. I am not splitting the bill with you. I am charging you for every single item you consumed, and I am personally adding a mandatory 20% gratuity because my highly trained staff had to endure the agonizing sound of your voice for 2 hours. Connor stares at the pink calculator, utterly paralyzed. He knows his credit cards are completely maxed out. He knows the funds he was relying on to cover his fraudulent lifestyle are never coming. He is trapped in a luxury cage of his own making, and the warden is the woman he just spent the entire night mocking. Chloe cannot handle the destruction of her reality. The pristine superior narrative she has fed herself for 32 years has just been violently ripped away. She shoots up out of her chair, her face contorted into a mask of pure, bitter hatred. She points a shaking finger directly at my face, screaming at the top of her lungs, completely oblivious to the hundreds of people watching her meltdown. "You are just a bitter, pathetic runaway," she shrieks, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the restaurant. "You planned this whole thing just to get back at us. You are still obsessing over the past. You are still mad that Mom and Dad missed your cheap 25th birthday dinner. You are punishing us because you were always the outcast and nobody wanted to celebrate you." Her words hang in the air, echoing in the dead silence of the dining room. She thinks she is inflicting a wound, bringing up my most painful memory to diminish my current victory. But she has fundamentally miscalculated. She has inadvertently opened Pandora's box, and she has given me the exact opening I need to deliver the final fatal blow. I slowly open the black folder and extract a single crisp sheet of paper. I place it deliberately over the torn halves of the $15,000 dinner bill. It is an email printout complete with official corporate letterhead. Connor's eyes drop to the page, and I watch the exact second his brain registers his own signature block at the bottom of the text. His pupils dilate. The arrogant sneer that has plastered his face for the last 2 hours completely dissolves, replaced by the slack-jawed horror of a man staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. I lean forward, resting my forearms on the table, and look him dead in the eye. I do not raise my voice. I speak with the chilling, measured cadence of an absolute victor. "I am Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings," I say smoothly. "I am the anonymous majority shareholder of the entity you have been desperately courting. You have been begging me for a bailout for 8 months, Connor. You have sent my acquisitions team 24 separate emails. You have offered to surrender your voting rights, your board seats, and your personal equity just to secure a cash injection. You were willing to hand over everything you own to a faceless corporation just to keep yourself out of a federal penitentiary." Connor stops breathing. His mouth opens, but his vocal cords refuse to cooperate. The silence at the table is absolute, broken only by the faint clinking of silverware from the surrounding diners, who are now openly watching our table. My mother Denise is gripping her wine glass so tightly her knuckles have turned completely white. My father Calvin looks like he has just been struck by lightning. The wealthy, untouchable son-in-law they worshipped is currently disintegrating right in front of their eyes. I tap my manicured fingernail against his printed email. "2 days ago, you begged my proxy for a $10 million recapitalization. You claimed it was a minor liquidity issue. But my forensic accountant spent the last week digging through the offshore shell companies you used to hide your massive deficits. We know exactly how much client capital you embezzled to maintain this pathetic illusion of wealth. You are not moving millions of dollars in the market. You are moving stolen money around a digital chessboard, praying the music does not stop." I sit back in my chair, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from my dress. "And so, as the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings, I am delivering my official response to your pitch. Effective immediately, your bailout request is unequivocally denied. There will be no $10 million wire transfer tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. There will be no corporate rescue. Your firm is going to completely collapse by Monday morning." Connor's face turns the color of wet ash. He looks physically ill. The heavy, expensive suit he is wearing suddenly looks like a costume that is 2 sizes too big. He reaches up with a trembling hand and aggressively tugs at the knot of his silk tie, suddenly unable to draw enough oxygen into his lungs. The reality of his impending destruction is crashing down on him in real time. When the market opens on Monday, I continue ensuring my voice carries the weight of a judge reading a final sentence. Your creditors are going to realize your accounts are entirely empty. The federal authorities already have the unredacted ledgers my team miraculously discovered. By Tuesday, the bank will freeze your personal accounts. By Wednesday, those leased luxury cars you used to impress my gullible parents will be repossessed. By Friday, you will likely be wearing federal handcuffs. You thought you could sit at my table in my restaurant and threaten me with your imaginary wealth. You brought a plastic knife to a nuclear war, Connor. Denise lets out a strangled, pathetic gasp. She looks at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, sickening realization. The daughter she spent decades degrading, the daughter she literally tried to bankrupt 30 minutes ago, holds the absolute power of life and death over her family's social standing. She tries to rapidly shift gears, her survival instincts kicking in. Aaliyah, she stammers, her voice dropping its haughty edge and taking on a desperate, pleading tone. Aaliyah, sweetheart, you cannot do this. This is your family, this is your sister's husband. We can fix this quietly. You have the money. You can save him. We can work together as a family. I turn my gaze to my mother, letting the sheer absurdity of her request wash over me. You lost the right to use the word family 10 years ago. Denise, I reply, my tone dropping the temperature at the table by 10 degrees. You sat there sipping your wine while your golden child threw a $15,000 bill in my face and told me it was the price of tuition for being in your presence. You wanted me to be humiliated. You wanted to watch me suffer. You do not get to claim family loyalty just because the loaded gun is suddenly pointing in your direction. Calvin looks like a man who has lost his entire compass. The patriarchal authority he has wielded over our family for decades has been entirely stripped away. He looks at Connor, searching for a denial, begging for the white knight venture capitalist to laugh and say this is all a ridiculous misunderstanding. But Connor is silently staring at the tablecloth, his chest heaving as panic completely consumes his nervous system. Chloe cannot process the information. Her brain rejects the reality that her limitless black card is about to be declined permanently. She looks at Connor, her eyes wide with frantic, manic energy. Connor, say something, she demands, her voice rising to a shrill, embarrassing pitch. Tell her she is lying. Tell them we are fine. Call your lawyers right now. Sue her for slander. We are supposed to go to the Hamptons next month. You promised me the Cartier watch for our anniversary. Fix this right now. She reaches out and grabs Connor's shoulder, shaking him violently. She does not offer him comfort. She does not ask him if he is okay. She only cares about the Cartier watch and the vacation home. She only cares that the glamorous, superior narrative she has broadcasted to her friends is about to be spectacularly destroyed. Connor slowly turns his head to look at his wife. The panic in his eyes begins to recede rapidly, replaced by something much darker and far more volatile. Stripped of his corporate power, facing imminent federal charges and publicly humiliated by a black woman he deemed his absolute inferior, the fragile, carefully maintained facade of the perfect, loving husband completely shatters. A cornered animal will always attack the weakest, closest target. Right now, that target is Chloe. He violently shoves her hand off his shoulder. The force of the gesture causes Chloe to gasp and shrink back in her chair. You stupid, greedy parasite! Connor snarls, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated hatred. The entire table freezes. Denise covers her mouth in horror. Calvin half rises from his seat, but Connor shoots him a look so genuinely unhinged that my father slowly sinks back down, completely paralyzed by cowardice. You sit there whining about a Cartier watch when I'm about to go to federal prison? Connor spits, leaning toward Chloe until he is inches from her face. Do you have any idea what I have had to do to keep you happy? Do you have any concept of the stress I have been under to fund your pathetic, endless need for attention? I embezzled that money because you threw a hysterical, screaming fit every time I suggested we adhere to a basic budget. You maxed out 3 separate platinum cards in 1 quarter just to impress women who secretly despise you. Chloe's face crumbles. Her lip quivers and the first genuine tears of the night spill over her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. Connor, please, she whispers, looking around desperately at the neighboring tables, completely terrified of the public embarrassment. People are watching us. Let them watch, Connor roars, abandoning all pretense of volume control. Let them see exactly what you are. You contributed absolutely nothing to our lives. You do not work. You do not build anything. You just consume. You drained my accounts, you drove me into a corner, and you forced me to steal just so you could pretend you were better than your sister. And the funniest part of this entire miserable joke is that your sister is a self-made millionaire, and you are literally nothing without my money. He stands up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the marble floor. He looks down at Chloe with a mixture of revulsion and regret. The house is heavily mortgaged. He sneers, delivering the final fatal blow to her reality. The cars belong to the bank. The jewelry you are wearing right now is going to be seized by federal investigators to pay back my clients. You are broke, Chloe. You are completely and utterly destitute. He does not look at my parents. He does not look at me. Connor turns on his heel and marches toward the exit of the obsidian room, leaving his golden child wife sobbing hysterically at the table, surrounded by the shattered ruins of the life they built on lies. Connor does not stop there. The dam has completely broken, and years of suppressed toxic resentment pour out of him in a violent, unstoppable flood. He points a shaking finger directly at Chloe's face, completely ignoring the collective gasp from the surrounding tables. Do you want to know the exact moment I crossed the line into federal fraud? He demands, his voice cracking with a terrifying mix of rage and despair. It was 3 years ago, right after your precious country club raised their annual membership dues, and you insisted we upgrade to the diamond tier so you could sit next to the mayor's wife at the charity gala. My firm was already taking a massive hit in the market. I told you we needed to step back. I told you we needed to fly commercial for one single summer. I told you we could not afford to completely gut and renovate the kitchen just because your best friend got imported Italian marble. Chloe shrinks back against her chair, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Her perfectly styled hair falls around her face, failing to hide the tears that are now freely flowing. Connor, stop it, she begs in a pathetic, high-pitched whisper. People are staring at us. Please, just lower your voice. We can talk about this at home. There is no home. Connor roars, the sound echoing harshly off the vaulted ceilings of the obsidian room. The jazz pianist in the corner abruptly stops playing. The silence in the restaurant becomes absolutely deafening, magnifying every single word Connor screams. The bank owns the house, Chloe. The federal government is going to seize whatever equity is left to pay back my investors. You spent $200,000 on a custom closet expansion while I was desperately liquidating assets just to cover my employees' payroll. You threw a massive hysterical fit, crying on the floor of our bedroom, threatening to divorce me because I asked you to return a $50,000 Birkin bag. You told me a real man would never ask his wife to compromise her lifestyle. You told me a real man finds a way to provide. He leans in closer, his face inches from hers, his expression twisted with disgust. So I became your version of a real man. I started moving client funds into dummy offshore accounts. I falsified quarterly returns to keep the venture capital flowing directly into my personal coffers. I committed federal crimes just to keep a smile on your face and to keep you from running back to your parents whining that your husband was a financial failure. I ruined my entire life just to fund your delusional socialite fantasy. Calvin suddenly jolts into action. His patriarchal pride finally overrides his shock and cowardice. He pushes his chair back and steps toward Connor, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Connor. That is enough, Calvin says, trying to inject his voice with the deep rumbling authority he used to control our household when we were children. You are having a severe panic attack. You are making a public spectacle of my daughter. Lower your voice immediately and sit down. We are going to handle this quietly like gentlemen. Connor snaps his head toward my father, his eyes wide and completely manic. Do not tell me to sit down, Calvin! He spits, his voice dripping with absolute venom. You are just as much of a parasite as she is. You and Denise groomed her for this exact existence. You raised a hollow, greedy shell of a human being, and you handed her off to the highest bidder. You sat at my dining table, drinking my expensive reserve scotch, bragging to your friends about your wealthy son-in-law, while knowing exactly how incredibly demanding and materialistic your daughter is. You saw the warning signs. You knew we were living vastly beyond our means, but you did not care as long as you could use my country club passes and pretend you were Atlanta royalty. Denise leaps out of her chair, her face flushed a dark, angry red. She clutches her designer purse to her chest as if the leather can shield her from the public humiliation. Connor, you have completely lost your mind, she screeches, abandoning her refined high society tone entirely. You are humiliating us in front of the entire city. Stop this right now. You are ruining everything we have built. I am not ruining anything. Connor fires back, his chest heaving as he glares at my mother. The illusion is over. It is done. The feds are coming, Denise. They are probably drafting the arrest warrants right this very second. And I guarantee you, the moment the authorities freeze my accounts, your precious golden daughter is going to pack a bag and come running straight back to your house. I hope you have an extra bedroom ready because she is entirely useless in the real world. She has no skills, she has no career. She cannot even balance a basic checkbook. Chloe lets out a loud, guttural sob. The sound is ugly and raw, stripping away every ounce of her carefully cultivated elegance. She buries her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as her mascara runs down her cheeks in thick black rivers. The reality of her situation is finally crashing down on her. She is not just losing her wealth, she is losing her entire identity. Without the designer labels, the luxury cars, and the elite status she lorded over everyone else, she has absolutely no idea who she is. Connor looks down at her weeping form, and the last remnants of his affection evaporate into thin air. He straightens his jacket, a pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of corporate dignity. I am going to the airport, he announces coldly to the table. I have a secondary passport and a cash account in the Cayman Islands that the feds do not know about yet. It is not much, but it is enough to disappear. You can stay here and wait for the FBI to knock on the front door. He turns his back on his sobbing wife and his horrified in-laws. He does not even glance in my direction. He simply marches through the dining room, his footsteps heavy and fast against the marble floor. The patrons part like the Red Sea, staring at him with a mixture of shock and profound disgust as he pushes through the grand mahogany doors and disappears into the Atlanta night. The aftermath of his departure leaves our table in absolute ruins. Chloe is hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she gasps for air, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking against the wood as she grips her hair. Calvin sinks slowly back into his chair, his face entirely devoid of color. The arrogant, imposing father who walked into my restaurant 2 hours ago is completely gone, replaced by a terrified aging man who just realized his family's social standing has been permanently obliterated. I sit perfectly still in my velvet chair, watching the destruction unfold. I feel no guilt. I feel no remorse. I simply feel the cool, deeply satisfying weight of justice taking its natural course. I pick up my crystal glass and take a slow sip of my sparkling water. Denise stands frozen for a long moment. She stares at the empty space where Connor just stood, then looks down at Chloe, who is practically hyperventilating into her cloth napkin. Denise's eyes dart frantically around the restaurant, taking in the whispering patrons and the lingering stares. Her brain is scrambling, desperately searching for a way out of this nightmare. She needs a savior, she needs a scapegoat, she needs someone to fix the mess. Her frantic gaze slowly shifts across the table and locks onto me. I can see the exact moment her mind rewrites the narrative. The delusion is so deeply ingrained in her psyche that she cannot physically accept reality. She refuses to acknowledge that her golden child is married to a criminal, or that her own superficial parenting directly contributed to this massive disaster. Instead, her survival instinct overrides all logic, and she completely ignores the fact that she spent the entire evening treating me like an inferior servant. Denise stomps around the edge of the mahogany table, her expensive heels clicking aggressively against the floor. She stops right next to my chair and violently slams both of her hands flat onto the table, leaning over me with a wild, desperate expression. You have to fix this, Denise demands, her voice shaking with a toxic combination of panic and absolute entitlement. I slowly lower my water glass, raising a single eyebrow at her sheer audacity. Fix what exactly, Denise? I ask, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. She points a trembling finger at Chloe, who is still weeping hysterically. You heard him! Aaliyah Denise screeches, completely disregarding the massive audience watching us. Connor is going to be arrested. He is going to lose his firm. He is leaving your sister with nothing. You are the CEO of Vanguard Pinnacle. You have $10 million sitting in an account waiting to be transferred. You have to sign those acquisition papers tomorrow morning and save his company. I stare at her, genuinely marveling at the endless depth of her delusion. You want me to commit $10 million of my own corporate capital to bail out a man who just publicly admitted to federal embezzlement? I ask, clarifying her absurd demand. She is your sister, Aliyah. Denise screams, her face contorting with rage and desperation. You are family. You cannot just sit there in your fancy restaurant with your millions of dollars and watch her life fall apart. You have the money. You have the power to stop this. You have to save Connor's firm so they can keep their house and avoid a massive public scandal. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We took care of you. You owe this family. You owe this family. Denise's voice reverberates across the table, completely shattering whatever fragile quiet had settled over the dining room after Connor's explosive departure. I look at her, my expression completely unchanging. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her demand hangs in the air, thick and foul. She is standing over me, her chest heaving, her designer jewelry clinking against the polished mahogany as she grips the edge of the table. She genuinely expects me to open my corporate vault and hand over $10 million to a confessed felon simply because we share the same bloodline. Calvin steps in, sensing that Denise's hysterical shrieking is not achieving the desired result. He smooths his silk tie, squares his shoulders, and adopts the paternal, authoritative tone he used to discipline me when I was a child. He believes he can simply command reality to bend to his will. He believes he can order me to comply. Listen to your mother, Aaliyah, Calvin says, pitching his voice low and steady to project an illusion of absolute control. This is not the time for petty sibling rivalry or holding on to ancient, exaggerated grudges. We are dealing with a crisis of massive magnitude, and you are the only one positioned to resolve it. Resolve it, I repeat, flatly, keeping my voice entirely devoid of inflection. Yes, resolve it, Calvin insists, leaning closer across the table, invading my physical space in a classic attempt at intimidation. You sit there looking at us with so much judgment, so much unwarranted bitterness. You think we failed you. You think we treated you poorly. But look at you tonight. Look at the empire you just claimed to own. Look at the immense power you hold in this city. Do you honestly think you would have achieved any of this if we had coddled you the way we had to coddle your sister? He actually smiles. It is a sickeningly proud, paternal expression that makes my stomach turn. He is attempting to rewrite 3 decades of neglect and emotional abuse in real time. We knew exactly what we were doing, Aaliyah. Calvin continues, his voice taking on the smooth, persuasive cadence of a seasoned salesman. We saw your potential from the very beginning. You were strong, you were resilient, you were an anvil, and we knew we could strike you as hard as we needed to because you would never break. Chloe was fragile glass. She needed our constant protection, our constant presence, and our financial support just to survive. We did not abandon you on your 25th birthday, or miss your graduations, or ignore your promotions out of malice. We gave you the greatest gift a parent can possibly give a child with your level of innate potential. We gave you independence. We forced you to rely entirely on yourself. We applied the pressure that created this diamond. Denise immediately seizes upon this fabricated narrative, her eyes lighting up as she recognizes the strategy. Her posture softens slightly, shifting from aggressive demanding to manipulative maternal coaxing. Your father is absolutely right, she says, reaching out to gently touch my hand. I pull my hand away before her fingers can make contact, but she ignores the rejection and presses on. Everything we did, every hard lesson we taught you was calculated. Tough love meant to make you the powerhouse you are today. We built you for this exact moment, Aaliyah. And now the family desperately needs a return on that investment. You have a fundamental moral duty to step up and protect our name. Denise gestures frantically toward Chloe, who is still slumped in her chair staring blankly at the torn $15,000 receipt on the table, completely paralyzed by the realization that her life is over. Do you have any idea what will happen to us if Connor's firm publicly collapses and he is indicted by the federal government? Denise demands, her voice trembling with the sheer terror of social exile. The scandal will completely consume us. We will be absolutely ruined in Atlanta. The board at the country club will ask us to quietly resign to spare them the embarrassment. The whispers at the Botanical Society galas will be unbearable. The charity committees I chair will replace me overnight. We will be pariahs, Aaliyah. We will be cast out of every single meaningful social circle we have spent 3 decades meticulously cultivating. She leans forward, her eyes wide and feverish, entirely consumed by her obsession with high society standing. You have the capital, Aaliyah. $10 million is a drop in the bucket for a holding company like Vanguard Pinnacle. You can wire the funds tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, stabilize Connor's accounts, and pay off whatever clients he borrowed from. We can hire an elite crisis management firm to spin the restructuring to the press, and nobody in our social circle ever has to know the ugly truth. You can save your sister's marriage, save our reputation, and finally take your rightful place as the savior of this family. Calvin nods in solemn agreement, completely validating his wife's insane proposal. It is a simple transaction for someone in your position, Aaliyah. You clear the debt, Connor avoids federal prison, and this family remains intact and respected. We took care of you when you were young. Now it is your turn to take care of us. Do the right thing. I sit back in my velvet chair and let the silence stretch out. I do not interrupt them. I do not argue with their twisted logic. I let them completely exhaust their desperate demands and empty their arsenal of emotional manipulation. I watch them carefully absorbing the sheer magnitude of their toxicity. They have just admitted that they view my lifelong trauma as a successful parenting strategy. They have explicitly stated that covering up a massive multi-million-dollar federal crime is perfectly acceptable as long as it preserves their country club memberships. They do not view me as a daughter. They view me as a limitless bank account that they have finally managed to crack open. Chloe slowly lifts her head. Her face is streaked with ruined makeup, her eyes swollen and red. She looks at me with a pathetic, fragile hope. She is fully buying into our parents' delusion. She genuinely believes that after years of relentless bullying, after throwing my birthday in my face, after treating me like a peasant, I am going to magically wave a corporate wand and erase her husband's felonies so she can keep her designer lifestyle. Please, Aaliyah, she whispers, her voice hoarse. Please save us. I look at the three of them sitting at my table in my restaurant, begging for my money while simultaneously taking credit for my success. There is no anger left in my body. There is no sorrow. The final lingering thread of childhood hope I had, that they might one day love me for who I am, completely dissolves, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. They will never change. They are fundamentally incapable of recognizing their own monstrous behavior. I do not offer them a rebuttal. I do not waste my breath dismantling their ridiculous tough love narrative, or explaining the legal impossibilities of covering up a federal embezzlement investigation. I simply offer them a slow, cold smile. Then, without saying a single word, I turn my head slightly to the left and give a sharp, subtle nod toward a private, dimly lit booth nestled in the far corner of the dining room. The heavy velvet curtains shielding the booth slide open with a soft, ominous rustle. A tall, strikingly sharp woman steps out of the shadows. She is dressed in an immaculate, razor-sharp slate gray suit, her hair pulled back into a severe, perfect chignon. Her posture is rigidly professional, radiating the kind of lethal, quiet authority that makes executives sweat in boardrooms. Her designer heels click with rhythmic, terrifying precision against the marble floor as she closes the distance between the corner booth and our table. This is Vivian. She is the lead corporate litigator and senior partner at the most ruthless law firm in the state, and she has been my personal attorney for the last 6 years. She has been sitting in that booth for the entire evening, quietly sipping a glass of sparkling water, observing every single interaction and waiting for my signal. Vivian stops smoothly at my side. She does not look at my parents. She does not acknowledge Chloe's sobbing. She operates with the cold efficiency of a hired assassin. She reaches into her tailored leather briefcase and pulls out a thick, heavy manila envelope. The flap is secured with stark red legal tape, stamped with the official seal of her law firm. The sight of that envelope instantly sucks the remaining oxygen out of the room. Calvin's confidence evaporates, and Denise shrinks back in her chair, her eyes darting between me and the imposing attorney. Vivian places the heavy envelope directly onto the center of the mahogany table. It lands with a solid, definitive thud right next to the torn pieces of the dinner bill and Connor's printed email. The sound of the heavy manila envelope hitting the polished mahogany acts as a gravitational pull, dragging every pair of eyes at the table directly toward it. The stark red legal tape stands out against the dim ambient lighting of the obsidian room like a slash of fresh blood. The official gold foil seal of Vivian's law firm catches the light, reflecting a level of institutional power that makes my father physically recoil. Calvin has spent his entire life worshiping corporate authority, bowing down to the symbols of elite wealth. Now that exact authority is standing over him, and it is explicitly allied with the daughter he just tried to manipulate. Vivian does not wait for an invitation to speak. She does not ask for permission. She commands the space the moment she opens her mouth, her voice projecting a smooth, icy professionalism that cuts right through the lingering hysteria of my mother. "Good evening," Vivian says, her tone perfectly, even completely devoid of the deference my parents are accustomed to receiving. "I am Vivian Vance, Senior Managing Partner at Vance, Sterling and Pierce. I represent Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings. More specifically, I serve as the personal chief legal counsel to the woman you are currently attempting to aggressively extort in a public establishment." The word extort lands like a physical strike. Calvin gasps, his face draining of whatever color it had left. He instinctively raises his hands, palms facing outward, adopting a defensive posture. "Extort," he stammers, his voice barely a hollow croak. "Now see here, there is no extortion taking place. We are having a private family discussion. We are simply asking for a favor." Vivian looks down at him, her gaze so sharp and unyielding it could strip paint from a wall. "Requesting a $10 million capital injection to conceal multiple federal felonies committed by your son-in-law is not a family favor, Calvin. It is a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. My client has zero legal, ethical, or moral obligation to rescue a criminal operation. Furthermore, demanding that she leverage her corporate assets to protect your personal social standing under extreme emotional duress crosses a very distinct legal boundary. I have been sitting in that booth, documenting every single threat, every demand, and every admission of financial malfeasance made at this table tonight." Denise's jaw drops open. The realization that an elite corporate litigator has been quietly cataloging her unhinged, desperate behavior for the last 2 hours completely paralyzes her. She looks at the envelope, then at Vivian, and finally back to me, her eyes wide with a frantic, cornered panic. The narrative she has spent 30 years building, the narrative where she is the untouchable matriarch and I am the flawed, rebellious outcast, is rapidly disintegrating into dust. I fold my hands neatly over my lap and lean forward, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "Tough love," I say softly, letting the sheer absurdity of her previous excuse hang in the air between us. "You actually sat there, looked me in the eye, and tried to rebrand 3 decades of profound emotional neglect as a strategic parenting choice. You want me to believe that you intentionally starved me of affection, validation, and basic parental support because you recognized my strength. You want to claim credit for the empire I built, attributing my success to the precise trauma you inflicted." Denise swallows hard, her throat bobbing as she desperately searches for a way to salvage her crumbling reality. "Aaliyah, we did what we had to do," she whispers, her voice trembling, stripping away the aggressive entitlement she displayed just moments ago. "We pushed you because we knew you could take it. We knew you were destined for greatness. I let out a slow, deeply tired sigh. The absolute cowardice of her revisionist history is almost boring. You did not push me, Denise. You abandoned me. You left me to drown because I was inconvenient. Because I did not fit perfectly into the little suburban country club diorama you were desperately trying to construct. I was not the right kind of daughter for your high society friends. I asked too many questions. I challenged the patriarchal nonsense Calvin constantly preached. I refused to shrink myself down to make your golden child feel taller. I shift my gaze to Calvin, who is currently staring at the tablecloth, as if praying it will swallow him whole. You did not give me the gift of independence, Calvin. You gave me the profound, crushing realization that if I fell, the people who were supposed to catch me would simply walk right over my body. You left me alone because it was easier than actually being a parent to a child you could not control. And the absolute pinnacle of that abandonment, the crowning achievement of your so-called tough love, happened exactly 10 years ago tonight. The mention of the timeline causes a visible flinch to ripple through both of my parents. They know exactly what night I am referencing. It is the night that fundamentally severed my ties to this family. It is the night that birthed the cold, calculated ambition that eventually built Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings. You claim you missed my 25th birthday dinner because Chloe had a severe life-threatening panic attack. I continue, my voice dropping to a low, deadly register. You told me she was hyperventilating in her apartment because she chipped a fingernail before a date with some junior executive. You swore to me up and down that it was a medical emergency. You used her fragile mental health as an absolute shield, demanding that I understand why my milestone birthday had to be sacrificed on the altar of her perpetual drama. Across the table, Chloe slowly lifts her head. Her makeup is completely ruined. Her eyes bloodshot from her hysterical weeping over Connor's brutal departure. She looks utterly exhausted, but the mention of this specific incident catches her attention. She frowns her brow, furrowing in genuine confusion. She looks at her mother, then back at me, her mind clearly struggling to piece together a puzzle she does not fully understand. For a decade, I believed that pathetic, insulting story I state, keeping my eyes locked onto my parents. I believed that you chose a chipped acrylic nail over my 25th birthday. I carried that specific rejection with me every single day. I used it as a reminder to never rely on anyone, to never trust a single promise either of you made. But the truth is always so much darker, is it not? The truth is always buried under layers of desperate, pathetic lies. Calvin suddenly reaches out his hand, shaking violently as he tries to touch my arm across the table. Aaliyah, please, he begs, his voice cracking with a level of fear I have never heard from him before. Leave the past in the past. We are here now. We are trying to move forward. We are trying to be a family. Do not do this. I pull my arm back, disgusted by the sheer cowardice of his plea. He knows exactly what is inside the manila envelope. He knows the lie is dead. Vivian and I have been doing some digging, I announce, my words cutting through his pathetic begging. When my holding company began looking into Connor's fraudulent firm 8 months ago, we required extensive background checks on all associated parties. That included his immediate family. That included his in-laws. I instructed my private investigators and forensic accountants to be thorough. I told them to leave absolutely no stone unturned to trace every asset, every property deed, and every financial transaction this family has executed over the last 15 years. I reach out and rest my manicured fingers lightly on top of the red legal tape sealing the envelope. You see, the problem with claiming a medical emergency is that medical emergencies leave paper trails, I say smoothly, watching the last drop of blood drain from my mother's face. If Chloe had genuinely suffered a panic attack severe enough to warrant abandoning your eldest daughter on her birthday, there would be a record. An urgent care visit, a prescription refill, a call to a physician. But there is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because Chloe never called you that night. Chloe gasps loudly. She stares at her parents, her red-rimmed eyes widening in shock. She never called you, she repeats, her voice trembling. Mom, what is she talking about? I was at a spa retreat in Sedona for my 25th birthday. I was not even in the state of Georgia. The silence that follows Chloe's revelation is deafening. My sister, the golden child, the perpetual excuse for their neglect, just publicly destroyed the very alibi they have hidden behind for a decade. Denise closes her eyes, a single tear escaping and sliding down her cheek. She knows it is over. The fortress of lies she built to protect her image has completely collapsed. I lean over the table, bringing my face closer to my parents, ensuring they cannot look away from the monster they created. I know exactly where you were 10 years ago on the night of my 25th birthday. I whisper, my voice echoing with absolute terrifying clarity. You were not at a hospital. You were not holding Chloe's hand through a panic attack. You were not dealing with a family emergency. I tapped the thick envelope twice. You were at a private, after-hours meeting at the downtown branch of the Georgia Heritage Bank. Vivian does not wait for an invitation to speak. She does not ask for permission. She commands the space the moment she opens her mouth, her voice projecting a smooth, icy professionalism that cuts right through the lingering hysteria my mother was just projecting. Good evening, Vivian says, her tone perfectly, even completely devoid of the deference my parents are accustomed to receiving from service staff and subordinates. I am Vivian Vance, Senior Managing Partner at Vance Sterling and Pierce. I represent Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings. More specifically, I serve as the personal chief legal counsel to the woman you are currently attempting to aggressively extort in a public establishment. The word extort lands like a physical strike. Calvin gasps, his face draining of whatever color it had left. He instinctively raises his hands, palms facing outward, adopting a defensive posture. Extort, he stammers, his voice barely a hollow croak. Now see here, there is no extortion taking place. We are having a private family discussion. We are simply asking for a favor. Vivian looks down at him, her gaze so sharp and unyielding it could strip paint from a wall. Requesting a $10 million capital injection to conceal multiple federal felonies committed by your son-in-law is not a family favor, Calvin. It is a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. My client has zero legal, ethical, or moral obligation to rescue a criminal operation. Furthermore, demanding that she leverage her corporate assets to protect your personal social standing under extreme emotional duress crosses a very distinct legal boundary. I have been sitting in that booth documenting every single threat, every demand, and every admission of financial malfeasance made at this table tonight. Denise's jaw drops open. The realization that an elite corporate litigator has been quietly cataloging her unhinged, desperate behavior for the last 2 hours completely paralyzes her. She looks at the envelope, then at Vivian, and finally back to me, her eyes wide with a frantic, cornered panic. The narrative she has spent 30 years building, the narrative where she is the untouchable matriarch and I am the flawed, rebellious outcast, is rapidly disintegrating into dust. Vivian slides her manicured fingernail under the red legal tape sealing the heavy envelope. The sharp tearing sound rips through the suffocating silence of the room. She pulls out 3 thick, professionally bound stacks of paper. She does not toss them casually. She places them with the precision of a coroner laying out autopsy photos. One stack goes directly in front of Calvin. One goes in front of Denise. The final stack is placed directly in the center of the table, right under Chloe's tear-streaked face. I keep my gaze locked on my father, watching the exact moment his eyes register the official logo of the Georgia Heritage Bank printed on the top page. The remaining color drains from his face, leaving him looking like a hollowed-out ghost. He does not reach for the papers. His hands remain paralyzed in his lap. 10 years ago, I begin, my voice cutting through the ambient jazz music that is still inexplicably playing in the background. You did not just ruin a birthday dinner. You executed a highly coordinated, premeditated financial crime. Denise's mouth opens, a desperate reflex to deny everything, but Vivian simply taps the top page of her stack with one perfectly manicured finger. Page 3. Vivian states, her tone completely devoid of emotion. Wire transfer authorization forms. Time stamped at exactly 7:14 in the evening. I lean forward, making sure I have their absolute, undivided attention. You see, my 25th birthday was not just a celebration. It was a legal trigger. Before grandmother passed away, she saw exactly who you two were. She saw the rampant materialism, the obsession with status, and the way you constantly drained your own resources to fund an illusion. So she bypassed you entirely. She left a substantial trust fund exclusively for me, her only practical grandchild. The terms were ironclad. The funds were to be held in a highly secure account until the exact day I turned 25. I watch Calvin swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He knows exactly what is coming next. The problem was that you found out about the trust. I continue, the cold anger of a decade finally finding its voice. You discovered that millions of dollars were sitting in a vault entirely out of your reach, designated for the daughter you deemed unworthy of such wealth. You could not stand it. You were drowning in debt from financing Chloe's lavish, ridiculous lifestyle, and there was a fortune just sitting there. But you could not touch it while I was in the room. You needed a distraction. You needed a reason for me to be completely isolated and occupied while you bypassed the security protocols. I turn my head slowly and look at Chloe. She has stopped hyperventilating. She is staring at the bank records on the table, her brow furrowed, desperately trying to connect the dots. Your panic attack was not a coincidence, Chloe. I say, my voice softening slightly, though not out of pity. It was a weapon. They weaponized your fragile emotional state. They fed into your anxiety over a chipped nail because they needed you to be hysterical. They needed an excuse to leave me stranded. And the moment they left me standing in the freezing rain outside that restaurant, they did not drive to your apartment to hold your hand. They drove straight to the downtown branch of the Georgia Heritage Bank. Calvin finally finds his voice, though it is weak and shaking. This is slander, he croaks, sounding like an old, broken man. You cannot prove anything. It has been 10 years. There is a statute of limitations on these things. You cannot just drag this up and threaten us with ancient history. Vivian lets out a sound that is half laugh, half scoff. It is completely terrifying. Statute of limitations. Vivian repeats, enunciating the legal term as if explaining a basic concept to a remarkably slow child. Calvin, you forged a signature on federal banking documents. You utilized a corrupt branch manager you frequently played golf with to bypass the mandatory in-person verification protocols. You systematically drained a highly restricted trust, transferred the capital into a series of dummy LLCs, and actively concealed the crime through fraudulent tax filings for an entire decade. The statute of limitations for continuous concealed federal fraud does not begin until the crime is discovered by the victim. My client discovered it precisely 3 weeks ago. You are not protected by time. You are exposed by it. Denise completely loses whatever composure she had managed to scrape together. She reaches out and grabs the stack of papers, frantically flipping through them, as if hoping the ink will magically rearrange itself into something benign. The transfer slips, the routing numbers, the forged signatures, it is all right there in black and white. We were protecting the family assets! Denise screeches, her voice hitting a panicked, shrill octave that causes the patrons at the next table to physically flinch. You were young, Aaliyah. You were ungrateful and rebellious. You would have squandered that money on foolish ventures. We took control of it to ensure it was properly managed. We invested it for the good of the entire family. We did it to make you strong. We did it for you. I let out a harsh, unapologetic laugh. You stole it from me, I repeat, shaking my head at the absolute sickness of her logic. You forged my name, liquidated a $7 million trust, and left me eating stale cake in a diner so you could protect my assets. Do you even hear yourself, Denise? You are completely delusional. You did not invest a single dime of that money for my future. You used it to pay off the massive balloon mortgages on this ridiculous lifestyle you are both so desperate to project. You used my inheritance to fund country club dues, luxury car leases, and high society galas. I point a finger directly at Calvin. You stole my future to pay for your present. You robbed your own flesh and blood to maintain a facade. And you thought I would never find out, because you assumed I would always be the quiet, obedient disappointment who never asked questions. Calvin slumps entirely. He looks at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. He has absolutely no defense, no patriarchal lecture to fall back on. He is just a thief sitting in an expensive suit. The air in the room is thick, completely charged with the devastating weight of the revelation. For 10 years, I carried the burden of their rejection. For 10 years, I believed I was simply unlovable, that my own parents found me so completely intolerable that they could not stomach sitting across from me on my birthday. I built my empire with a fractured heart driven by the agonizing belief that I had to prove my worth to people who simply did not care. But they did care. They cared immensely about my net worth. They cared enough to orchestrate a sophisticated financial crime just to strip me of the one advantage my grandmother had tried to give me. I look at the three of them, these architects of my misery, and I feel nothing but a cold, absolute resolve. The emotional hold they had over me is permanently severed. They are no longer my family. They are simply targets for litigation. "We are filing a massive civil suit tomorrow morning," Vivian announces, her tone sharp and precise, cutting through the heavy silence. "We are filing for the full $7 million plus 10 years of accumulated interest, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and fraud. We will be placing immediate liens on your primary residence, your vehicles, and any remaining investment portfolios you possess. Furthermore, we are formally handing over this entire dossier of evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. By the end of the week, you will likely be facing indictments for wire fraud and conspiracy." Denise lets out a pathetic, high-pitched wail and buries her face in her hands. Calvin just sits there, completely frozen, staring at the torn $15,000 dinner receipt that now looks like spare change compared to the financial annihilation heading his way. But it is Chloe who breaks the final layer of tension. Throughout this entire exchange, she has been sitting rigidly in her chair. The hysterical sobbing that Connor provoked has completely ceased. The tears have dried on her cheeks, leaving behind dark, messy streaks of mascara. She is staring at the bank record sitting in the center of the table. She reaches out with a trembling hand and slowly pulls the stack of papers toward her. She stares at the top page, her eyes scanning the astronomical numbers printed in bold black ink. $7 million. She looks up. She does not look at me. She looks directly at our parents. The expression on her face is completely unrecognizable. It is not the face of the spoiled, pampered golden child. It is a look of pure, unadulterated confusion, mixing with a sudden dawning horror. $7 million. Chloe whispers, her voice raspy and hollow. She traces the number on the paper with her finger, as if she needs to physically touch the ink to prove it is real. Calvin flinches at the sound of her voice. Denise refuses to look up from her hands. Chloe slowly raises her head, her gaze locking onto her mother. "You stole $7 million 10 years ago," Chloe says, the volume of her voice rising steadily with every word. I watch my sister closely. The gears in her mind are violently grinding together. She is processing the timeline. She is processing the reality of her own life over the last decade. She is processing the relentless pressure she faced to marry a wealthy man, the constant anxiety over maintaining appearances, and the fact that her husband just left her completely destitute and facing federal investigations of his own. "Where is it?" Chloe demands, her voice cracking as she stares at our parents. Denise finally looks up, her eyes wide with panic. "Chloe, please do not do this right now. We are all very upset." "Where is the money?" Chloe screams, slamming her fists onto the table so hard the crystal glasses rattle. "If you stole $7 million 10 years ago, where did it go? You constantly told me we were strapped for cash. You made me feel guilty every time I asked for a loan. You pushed me into marrying Connor because you said he was the only way to secure my future. You watched my husband scream at me tonight about going bankrupt. You watched him leave me with absolutely nothing. If you took all of that money, why didn't I ever see a single dime of it?" "Oh, but you did see it, Chloe," I say, my voice perfectly level, striking a sharp contrast against her rising, frantic hysteria. "You lived in it. You drove it. You wore it on your wrist and paraded it around the Buckhead country clubs for the last 10 years. You slept in it every single night." Chloe stares at me, her chest heaving completely, failing to comprehend the magnitude of my statement. "I did not get $7 million, she insists, her voice shrill and echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the dining room. I would know if I had $7 million. Connor and I have been drowning in debt for months. He just told you he is fleeing the country. We do not have that kind of money. You do not have it now, I correct her smoothly, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. But you certainly had it a decade ago. Or rather, your husband did. I turn my head slightly toward Vivian. She does not need a verbal command. She operates with lethal synchronized precision. She simply reaches out with one immaculate hand and taps the second stack of bound legal documents sitting directly in front of my father. Let me direct your attention to the routing numbers clearly highlighted on page 7. Vivian states, her voice ringing out with the crisp, authoritative cadence of a prosecutor closing a capital murder trial. The $7 million forcibly liquidated from Aaliyah's trust fund did not go into a personal checking account. It was not utilized for luxury vacations or immediate personal expenses. It was wired through a series of highly obfuscated offshore holding companies directly into the primary operating account of a failing venture capital startup, a startup entirely owned and operated by Connor Sterling. Chloe physically recoils as if Vivian just struck her across the face. She looks down at the papers, her eyes tracking the highlighted yellow lines, her mind violently struggling to process the impossible truth. 10 years ago, I say, capturing Chloe's panicked gaze and refusing to let her look away. Your brilliant Ivy League-educated husband was a catastrophic, undeniable failure. His very first startup was entirely bankrupt. He had mismanaged his initial investor capital. His partners were preparing to sue him for gross negligence, and he was exactly 30 days away from complete financial ruin. He was a fraud from the very beginning, Chloe. He was a hollow suit with a fancy degree and absolutely nothing else to his name. Denise lets out a strangled, pathetic sound. Aaliyah, please, she whimpers, pressing her hands over her face. Please stop talking. People are starting to listen to us. I ignore her entirely, keeping my focus locked on my sister. The realization is slowly dawning on Chloe's face, transforming her expression from confusion to absolute hollow devastation. Our parents knew he was failing. I continue, my words dropping like heavy stones onto the table. They knew your perfect, handsome fiancé was completely broke, and they could not stomach the embarrassment. They could not fathom the idea of their precious golden daughter marrying a man who was about to move back into his fraternity brother's basement. They needed the prestige. They needed the country club to view them as the ultimate success story. I finally shift my gaze from Chloe to my parents. The disgust I feel for them is a physical weight in my chest, heavy and deeply satisfying. You sold out your own daughter, I say, my voice dropping to a low, venomous register that commands the entire table. You took the generational wealth that our grandmother spent her entire life building, and you handed it over to a mediocre, failing white man. Grandmother was a black woman who scrubbed floors, saved every single penny, and fought tooth and nail to build a real estate portfolio during an era when the entire world was designed to crush her. She built that trust fund so her descendants would never have to bow down to anyone. She built it for me because she knew I possessed her fire, and you stole it. I lean across the mahogany table, forcing Calvin to look at me. He tries to avert his eyes, but the sheer force of my presence pins him to his chair. You stole your own black daughter's birthright to buy your way into white corporate prestige, I spit, letting the absolute ugliest truth of their existence hang in the air. You were so utterly desperate to secure a wealthy white son-in-law, to elevate your social standing in Atlanta, that you literally purchased him. You bought a trophy husband for your golden child. You funded his failing company behind my back, propped up his pathetic illusion of success, and let him parade around this city pretending to be a financial genius. You funded the very fraud that is currently destroying your lives. The silence that follows my declaration is absolute. The distant clinking of silverware from the other patrons seems to fade away entirely. The jazz music is completely drowned out by the heavy, suffocating weight of reality crashing down upon my parents. Chloe lets out a sound that is entirely inhuman. It is a deep, guttural moan of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. She grips her hair with both hands, her diamond rings catching the light as she rocks back and forth in her velvet chair. My whole life is a lie. Chloe sobs, her voice completely broken. He never provided for me. He never built anything. You bought him for me. My entire marriage is a purchased, pathetic lie. She looks at Denise, her face twisted with a level of hatred I have never seen her direct at our mother before. You let him scream at me tonight, Chloe yells, her voice cracking as tears pour down her ruined face. You let him stand right there and call me a parasite. You let him blame me for his bankruptcy, claiming my lifestyle ruined him when you are the only reason he ever had a single dime to his name. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell him you bought his entire firm? Denise cannot speak. Her jaw trembles, but no words come out. The matriarch who has controlled every narrative, who has manipulated every single family interaction for 3 decades, is completely stripped of her power. She is exposed as a social climbing fraud who sacrificed her own child to maintain a country club membership. Calvin finally snaps. His patriarchal ego simply cannot handle being dismantled by a daughter he has always viewed as inferior. His face flushes a dark, furious purple, and he slams his heavy hands flat onto the table, sending the silverware clattering against the fine china plates. It was a business decision, Calvin roars, completely abandoning the quiet, refined gentleman persona he spent his entire life cultivating. He glares at me, his eyes wild and desperate. You do not understand how these things work, Aaliyah. We did not steal the money. We redirected it into a high-yield venture. Connor's firm was struggling, yes, but the foundational IP was solid. We knew that with the right capital injection, he could turn it around. We recognized an opportunity to secure this family's position permanently. He points a shaking finger at the bank records sitting on the table. We were going to pay you back, Aaliyah, Calvin insists, his voice taking on a pathetic, pleading cadence as he tries to sell me a decade-old lie. We structured it as an anonymous angel investment. We were holding the equity in a blind trust. The moment Connor took the firm public, the moment he generated the massive returns he promised us, we were going to quietly replace the $7 million in your account with interest. You never would have even known it was gone. We were going to make you richer than you could possibly imagine. We are family, Aaliyah. We protect our own. We were doing it for the family. I look at him completely unmoved by his frantic bargaining. The sheer delusion required to classify stealing a $7 million inheritance as a temporary family loan is genuinely staggering. But he didn't take it public, did he, Calvin? I ask, my voice slicing through his frantic rationalization like a scalpel. He did exactly what a mediocre, incompetent fraud always does. He burned through my grandmother's $7 million, and then he started stealing from his own clients to keep the lights on. He built a massive, glittering house of cards on a foundation of my stolen money, and now the federal government is knocking on the front door with a sledgehammer. I slowly pick up my crystal glass, take a final deliberate sip of my sparkling water, and set it down with a sharp clink against the wood. You made a spectacularly bad investment, Calvin, I say, looking directly into my father's terrified eyes. You gambled my inheritance on a cowardly felon, and you lost absolutely everything. Calvin opens his mouth to argue, desperate to maintain the illusion of control, but Vivian shifts her stance. The subtle movement instantly draws his attention. She reaches into her leather briefcase one final time, her expression completely merciless. But I am not quite finished collecting my returns, I announce, offering my father a smile that contains absolutely no warmth. Vivian does not hesitate. She reaches into the sleek depths of her leather briefcase and extracts a single final document. Unlike the voluminous stacks of banking records she just distributed, this is a slender folder bound in heavy black cardstock and embossed with the silver crest of a private equity acquisitions firm. She does not slide this one across the table. She places it gently in front of me, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the mahogany table. The dining room around us has become utterly irrelevant. The clinking of crystal, the soft murmur of wealthy patrons, the smooth jazz floating from the corner piano, all of it is completely muted by the suffocating heavy gravity radiating from our table. The illusion of my family's superiority has been entirely dismantled. There is no more posturing. There is no more aggressive patriarchal commanding from Calvin. There is no more condescending high society lecturing from Denise. My mother is openly weeping. It is not the calculated, delicate crying she uses to manipulate charity boards or garner sympathy at country club luncheons. It is a raw, ugly, shuddering display of genuine shame. Her shoulders heave with every ragged breath she takes. The flawless facade she spent 30 years meticulously constructing has been violently shattered, leaving her exposed as a desperate thieving fraud. She covers her face with both hands, unable to look at me, unable to look at her golden child, unable to even look at the husband who facilitated their mutual destruction. I rest my hands on top of the black folder. I look at my father, who is staring at me with a hollow, terrified expression, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked rhythms. You see, Calvin? I begin, keeping my voice perfectly level, the calm, measured tone of an executive delivering a quarterly report. The problem with building a life entirely on optics is that optics are incredibly expensive to maintain. $7 million sounds like an insurmountable fortune to a normal person. But to a mediocre man desperately trying to play the role of an elite Atlanta venture capitalist, it burns up remarkably fast. Connor had to lease premium office space in Buckhead. He had to hire staff to create the illusion of a bustling firm. He had to pay massive dividends to his early investors, using the principal from your stolen funds, executing a textbook Ponzi scheme just to keep the authorities off his back. Chloe lets out a sharp, choked gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as the reality of her husband's criminal enterprise continues to crash down around her. And then there was the lifestyle maintenance. I continue, shifting my gaze to my sister. He had to keep you happy, Chloe. He had to fund the designer wardrobes, the European vacations, the custom kitchen renovations, and the diamond-tier country club memberships. He had to ensure that Calvin and Denise never suspected he was actually a complete financial failure, but the stolen money eventually ran dry. $7 million was entirely incinerated within the first 5 years of your marriage. Calvin shakes his head slowly, his eyes darting frantically around the table. No, he whispers, his voice barely audible. That is impossible. He was bringing in new clients. He showed us the quarterly prospectuses. He showed us the growth charts. He showed you exactly what you wanted to see. I correct him, my voice devoid of any sympathy. He showed you fabricated spreadsheets printed on heavy, expensive paper, and you swallowed it whole because you were so completely desperate to believe you had secured a winner. You were so blinded by his pedigree and his proximity to white corporate power that you never once demanded an independent audit. You just sat back and drank his scotch, patting yourselves on the back for buying your way into the upper echelon of society. I opened the black folder, revealing a stack of highly sensitive notarized financial contracts. When the stolen trust fund evaporated, Connor was backed into a corner. I explained, detailing the mechanics of their ruin with cold precision. He could not reduce his lifestyle without raising immediate suspicion. He could not admit to his clients that their capital was gone. So he did what desperate, arrogant men always do. He turned to the shadow markets. He began taking out massive, high-interest mezzanine loans from private, unregulated lending institutions. These are not standard bank loans, Calvin. These are predatory, aggressive capital injections designed for distressed assets carrying astronomical interest rates and requiring severe, uncompromising leverage. Calvin's breathing accelerates. He grips the armrests of his velvet chair, his knuckles turning stark white as his mind finally begins to catch up with the narrative I am laying out. To secure those kinds of massive 8-figure loans, Connor needed substantial collateral. I say, letting the words sink in slowly. The lenders required hard physical assets to underwrite the debt. He started by putting up his own home, the spectacular, sprawling mansion you two were always so incredibly proud of. He quietly signed the deed over as collateral, effectively turning his primary residence into a giant poker chip. Chloe lets out a guttural sob, dropping her head onto the table as she realizes the home she spent hundreds of thousands of dollars decorating no longer belongs to her. But a single mansion was not enough to cover the massive hole he had dug in his client accounts. I continue, watching Calvin's face contort with a sudden, dawning terror. The lenders demanded more security. They needed more leverage to justify extending millions of dollars to a firm with zero liquid capital. So Connor came to you, Calvin. He came to you and Denise, likely spinning a brilliant, convoluted story about a temporary liquidity crisis. He probably called it a bridge loan, a minor administrative formality required to secure a massive corporate merger. Calvin's mouth opens, but no sound emerges. He is completely paralyzed. You wanted so desperately to protect him, I say, my voice dripping with absolute freezing contempt. You wanted to protect the golden son-in-law, the symbol of your social triumph. You did not even have your own attorneys review the paperwork. You trusted his white corporate prestige over your own common sense. You signed the guarantee documents, Calvin. You and Denise both signed the papers effectively pledging your entire estate, your primary residence, and all of your remaining physical assets as the secondary collateral for Connor's toxic predatory loans. Denise's weeping escalates into a frantic, hyperventilating panic. She claws at her own chest, struggling to pull oxygen into her lungs as the ultimate reality of her situation destroys her. She has not just lost her social standing. She has lost the very roof over her head. He promised us it was only for 90 days. Calvin stammers, his voice completely broken, his absolute arrogance finally shattering into pieces. He swore to me on his life. He said the firm was going public. He said the IPO would clear all the debt and we would be completely insulated. We were just providing a temporary safety net. We are family. We had to support him. You supported a parasite, I state coldly, and you funded his fraud with your own home. 2 weeks ago, the final grace period on those massive loans officially expired. Connor had no clients left to steal from. He had no more trust funds to drain. He missed the balloon payment, and he officially defaulted on the entire debt portfolio. I watched the blood completely drain from Calvin's face. When a borrower defaults on unregulated mezzanine debt, the lenders do not wait. I explain, leaning back in my chair and folding my hands. They do not negotiate. They do not care about your country club status or your charity galas. They immediately initiate the legal protocols to seize the collateral. The private lending institution filed the paperwork to officially claim ownership of Chloe's mansion and your estate. Calvin frantically shakes his head, refusing to accept the death sentence. No, he whispers wildly. No, we have lawyers. We can fight the seizure. We can claim we were defrauded by Connor. We can tie this up in litigation for years. They cannot just take our home, Aaliyah. We will go to the press. We will go to the authorities. You cannot go to the authorities. Calvin. Vivian interjects, her voice slicing through his frantic bargaining like a blade. If you attempt to claim you were defrauded by Connor Sterling, any competent investigator will immediately discover that the initial capital used to fund his firm was stolen from your daughter's trust fund. You cannot report a fire when you are the one who struck the match. You have absolutely no legal recourse. The assets belong to the debt holder. Calvin looks at me, his eyes wide and completely feral with desperation. He realizes he has nowhere left to turn. He realizes his entire world has burned to the ground. Aaliyah, you have to help us, he pleads, abandoning every last ounce of his pride. Please, you are a billionaire. You own Vanguard Pinnacle. You have infinite resources. You can buy the debt from the lenders. You can pay them off and secure the deeds. You can save our home. We are your family. We are your blood. Please, I am begging you. Do not let us lose everything. I look at him. I look at the man who allowed my sister to bully me. The man who ignored my achievements. The man who stole $7 million from me. And then demanded I thank him for his tough love. I look at him begging for his life, and I feel the cold, heavy satisfaction of absolute justice. I slowly trace the silver crest on the black folder sitting in front of me. You are entirely correct about one thing, Calvin. I say, my voice perfectly calm and completely lethal. Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings does possess infinite resources. In fact, we have an entire corporate division dedicated exclusively to the acquisition of distressed assets and defaulted debt portfolios. I slide the black folder across the table, stopping it exactly 1 inch from his trembling hands. When Connor defaulted 2 weeks ago, the lending institution moved to quietly liquidate the collateral before the federal authorities could freeze the accounts. I explain, watching Calvin's eyes lock onto the silver crest. They needed to offload the toxic debt immediately. They offered it at a massive, unprecedented discount to a select group of private equity buyers. I lean forward, closing the distance between us, ensuring he hears every single syllable of my final devastating strike. I did not just investigate his firm, Calvin. I utilized my corporate acquisitions team to systematically buy up every single cent of Connor's defaulted loans for pennies on the dollar. Calvin stops breathing. Denise freezes mid-sob. Chloe stares at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I own the debt. I state softly, the words hanging in the air with the weight of an executioner's gavel. I own the paper. I own the loans, which means as of this morning I legally own Chloe's mansion, and I legally own your estate. Vivian does not hesitate. She reaches into the sleek depths of her leather briefcase and extracts two slender folders bound in heavy black cardstock and embossed with the silver crest of my private equity acquisitions firm. She does not slide them casually. She places them gently on the table, aligning them perfectly with the edge of the mahogany. The dining room around us has become utterly irrelevant. The clinking of crystal, the soft murmur of wealthy patrons, the smooth jazz floating from the corner piano, all of it is completely muted by the suffocating heavy gravity radiating from our table. The illusion of my family's superiority is entirely dismantled. There is no more posturing. There is no more aggressive patriarchal commanding from Calvin. There is no more condescending high society lecturing from Denise. My mother is openly weeping. It is not the calculated, delicate crying she uses to manipulate charity boards or garner sympathy at country club luncheons. It is a raw, ugly, shuddering display of genuine shame. Her shoulders heave with every ragged breath she takes. The flawless facade she spent 30 years meticulously constructing has been violently shattered, leaving her exposed as a desperate, thieving fraud. She covers her face with both hands, unable to look at me, unable to look at her golden child, unable to even look at the husband who facilitated their mutual destruction. I rest my hands on top of the black folders. I look at my father, who is staring at me with a hollow, terrified expression, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked rhythms. Vivian taps the top of the first folder. These are immediate notices of eviction. Vivian states, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. Notice to vacate the premises within 30 days. One is for the primary residence currently occupied by Connor and Chloe Sterling. The second is for the estate registered to Calvin and Denise. My client now holds the deeds. You are officially tenants in properties you no longer own, and your leases have been permanently terminated. Before Calvin can even attempt to formulate a response, a sudden violent commotion erupts at the front entrance of the restaurant. The heavy mahogany doors swing open so forcefully they bang against the brass doorstops. Connor bursts back into the dining room. He is no longer the arrogant, perfectly composed executive who dramatically marched out 20 minutes ago. His tie is yanked loose, his hair is disheveled, and his face is completely drained of blood. He is clutching his smartphone with a white-knuckled grip, staring at the screen with absolute unadulterated terror. He storms past the host stand, ignoring the outraged protests of the restaurant staff, and marches directly back to our table. He does not even look at me. He glares down at Chloe, his chest heaving as he gasps for air. My accounts are frozen, Connor shouts, completely abandoning any remaining pretense of public decency. The offshore accounts in the Caymans, the emergency funds, they are locked. The bank told me a primary lien holder seized the routing numbers this morning. I could not even buy a plane ticket. I could not even pay the valet. He whips his head toward Calvin, his eyes wide and manic. Did you do this, Calvin? Did you call your contacts at the bank? Calvin does not answer. He slowly raises a trembling hand and points toward me. Connor's gaze follows the gesture, his panicked eyes finally landing on my face. He looks at the black folders on the table. He looks at Vivian standing beside me in her razor-sharp suit. The realization hits him with the force of a freight train. He realizes that I did not just discover his fraud, I engineered his total financial annihilation. You? Connor breathes, taking a stumbling step backward. You bought the debt. I did. I reply smoothly, offering him a perfectly polite smile. Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings acquires distressed assets. Your entire life happened to be available at a rather steep discount. Connor's survival instinct immediately kicks into overdrive. He realizes the ship is completely submerged and he is determined not to drown with it. He turns back to Chloe, his expression hardening into something cruel and utterly self-serving. "I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning." Connor announces, his voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "I am filing immediately. I am going to tell the federal prosecutors that I was operating under extreme financial duress, caused by your incessant psychotic demands for luxury. I am going to tell them your parents forced me into those mezzanine loans to protect their own social standing. I will testify against all of you to secure a plea deal. I am completely done with this family." He turns on his heel and storms away for the second time, leaving a wake of absolute destruction behind him. Chloe lets out a piercing, devastated scream. She scrambles out of her chair, reaching for the empty space where her husband just stood, before collapsing back onto the velvet cushions. She turns to our parents, her face twisted in pure agony. Her entire world, the money, the status, the marriage she lorded over everyone, has vanished into thin air. "Mom, Dad, please," Chloe begs, grabbing Calvin's sleeve, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "You have to fix this. You have to call your lawyers. You have to give me the money to hire a defense attorney. Where are we going to live? What are we going to do? Please help me." Calvin looks at his golden child, the daughter he sacrificed my future to protect. He slowly shakes his head, tears finally welling in his own eyes. "We have nothing, Chloe," he whispers, his voice breaking entirely. "We are broke. We are completely ruined." I watch the three of them sitting at the table, clutching each other, as the reality of their self-inflicted catastrophe completely consumes them. There is no more bargaining. There is no more gaslighting. The heavy, suffocating silence of total defeat settles over them. I slowly stand up from my velvet chair. I reach down and smoothly button my tailored designer coat. I adjust my cuffs, ensuring my posture is perfectly straight. I look down at the wreckage of my biological family, feeling the cool, quiet rush of absolute peace. 10 years ago, I say, my voice steady and echoing clearly in the quiet dining room. 10 years ago, you canceled my birthday to protect a lie. Tonight, I am canceling your legacy to protect my peace. I do not wait for a response. I turn my back on them and walk toward the front of the restaurant, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Vivian falls into step right beside me. I push through the heavy glass doors and step out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night, leaving the sound of my mother's sobbing completely behind me. I do not look back. 6 months later, the warm evening breeze sweeps across the private rooftop terrace, carrying the faint, vibrant sounds of the city below. The Atlanta skyline stretches out in every direction, a glittering sea of lights and towering skyscrapers. The rooftop belongs to my newest commercial acquisition, a massive luxury high-rise in the absolute center of the financial district. Tonight, the entire space is reserved exclusively for my 35th birthday. I stand near the edge of the glass balcony wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that catches the ambient light of the city. Soft, rhythmic music plays from the hidden outdoor speakers. The terrace is not crowded. There are no superficial high society socialites. There are no country club elites desperately trying to network. The guest list is small, meticulous, and strictly enforced. I am surrounded by my chosen family. Vivian stands near the sleek outdoor bar, laughing at a joke made by my lead financial analyst. My entire executive team is here, the people who stood by my side and worked grueling hours to build Vanguard Pinnacle into an unstoppable empire. Kiara, my chief operating officer and my closest friend, walks over to me. She is holding 2 crystal flutes of vintage champagne. She hands one to me, her dark eyes sparkling with genuine warmth. "Happy birthday, Aaliyah," Kiara says, clinking her glass gently against mine. 35 looks incredibly powerful on you. "Thank you, Kiara," I reply, taking a slow sip of the crisp champagne. It feels incredibly powerful. She turns and looks out over the glittering skyline, leaning her elbows against the glass railing. So she begins, a knowing, sharp smile playing on her lips. "I promised I would not talk about business tonight, but I thought you might appreciate a brief status update on a certain distressed asset portfolio we liquidated a few months ago. I raise a single eyebrow, taking another sip of my drink. I suppose I have time for a very brief update. Kiara pulls her phone from her clutch and quickly scans a message from our legal department. Connor Sterling officially lost his plea deal yesterday, she reports, her tone purely professional. The federal prosecutors discovered he was hiding a secondary cash account in the Cayman Islands. They indicted him on 6 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, and obstruction of justice. He is currently sitting in a holding cell waiting for his trial. The legal experts are predicting a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. I simply nod, feeling absolutely zero pity for the man who built his life on my stolen inheritance. And the others, I ask. Kiara swipes her screen. The bank officially foreclosed on the Buckhead estate and the secondary mansion after we processed the eviction notices. Your parents and your sister had to completely vacate the premises. They are currently renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a severely rundown suburb 30 miles outside the city limits. Calvin tried to leverage his country club connections to get a consulting job. But the moment the embezzlement scandal hit the local news, their entire social circle completely severed ties. The country club formally revoked their memberships to avoid the negative press. Denise was quietly removed from every single charity board she chaired. They are total pariahs. Kiara pauses, taking a sip of her champagne before delivering the final piece of information. And Chloe is currently working a minimum wage retail job at a discount clothing store in a strip mall. Her wages are being heavily garnished to pay off the remaining interest from Connor's secondary debts. The update washes over me, carrying the final definitive closure I needed. The people who treated me like a burden, who stole my future to fund their delusions, are exactly where they belong. They are living the exact reality they created for themselves. Thank you, Kiara, I say softly, turning my gaze back to the sprawling city lights. That is exactly the update I needed to hear. She smiles, touching my arm lightly, before turning back to join the rest of the party. I stand alone for a moment, listening to the genuine laughter of my friends echoing across the terrace. I look at the empire I built, the skyline I helped shape, and the people who actually showed up for me when I had absolutely nothing. I survived the scapegoat role. I took the ashes of their rejection, the cold, heavy weight of their betrayal, and I forged it into absolute titanium. I am no longer the unloved, forgotten daughter, waiting for scraps of affection at a mahogany table. I am the architect of my own destiny. I take a deep breath of the warm city air, surrounded by my true family, and I finally completely find my peace. The greatest lesson from this story is that blood does not guarantee loyalty. Sometimes the people expected to protect you are the ones who cause the deepest wounds. When toxic relatives use you as a scapegoat to fund their illusions, walking away is not cruelty. It is survival. You must build your own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. True power comes from defining your success and protecting your peace at all costs. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to save yourself? Share your story in the comments below, and please subscribe today.